Thanks everybody for coming. This presentation is called Who Needs Don Draper? The Real Mad Men Were Much More Interesting. So let me get a show of hands to begin. How many people consider themselves die-hard Mad Men fans? I mean, the real enchilada. Okay, I got 3 or 4. How many of you are kind of, I watch it sometimes kind of thing, but I really like it? Okay, great. Well, let me say first off, to begin everything, that my presentation today is not meant to knock Mad Men, the show, or Don Draper, the character, per se. I love the show as much as you do. I've got all the seasons on DVD, and I'm such a nerd that I watch it in reruns, even though I have them on DVD. I'll watch it if it's on AMC. And I think you'll agree that it's the only show, Mad Men is the only show in advertising history, TV history, that has gotten advertising even remotely correct. I mean, it's really the only one that accurately portrays what it's like to actually work within an advertising agency. And we deserve it, don't you think? I mean, we've had, some of you younger people won't know these references, but some of our older ones, we've had to survive 60 years of idiotic portrayals of advertising people like Darren Stevens on Bewitched, Angela Bauer on Who's the Boss, and the Bauer Agency, and heaven help us all, Jesse and Joey from Full House. I don't even remember what their agency was called, but they had their own little ad agency. So after 60 years of that, Mad Men is a breath of fresh air. But let me say this, I have a couple of beefs with the show. The first one is that if you watch Mad Men carefully, and I do, it's really only 30% about advertising. The majority of it, the rest of it, is a melodrama about who Don Draper is sleeping with, the sexual antics of his daughter, the fact that Peggy Olson had a baby out of wedlock, the secretly gay account executive, and on and on and on. And in other words, the makers of the show didn't think that advertising was interesting in and of itself to base the whole show on. They had to tart everything up with sex, which is really sad because the actual people that these characters are based on are nothing like this, and they're interesting in and of themselves simply because of the work that they did. None of them ever stole the identity of a dead soldier. None of them were raised in a whorehouse, and none of them had emotional breakdowns in front of clients. They were pretty ordinary people who were interesting because of their obsession with great work. We think that's only a 2014 thing. No. It was started in a period called the Creative Revolution of the 1960s. And it's interesting, even though most advertising people I know love Mad Men, and the presentation I made the other day was filled with Mad Men fans, I've done some research, and the people that these characters are based on that actually lived through this and did the work in this era, they despise the show. They hate it. I want to show you a quote from Paula Green, who most people agree is the character that is the woman that the Peggy Olson character was based on. Brilliant copywriter. She wrote the Avis campaign, the Levi's bread campaign, lots of other things you'd know. The Avis campaign is her most notable. And she was just inducted into the Advertising Hall of Fame last year, and they asked her in her interview if Mad Men was, she was a copywriter at Dole Dane Bernbach, which I'll be talking a lot about in the next couple minutes. They asked her if Mad Men was accurate, and here's what she said. Oh, bull, it's just a soap. The agency I worked for, none of that went on. If they did it on their own time. People didn't sit around drinking in their offices. I have another quote from you from George Lois. Anybody know who George Lois is? He's whom, and I saw an interview with Matthew Weiner, who's the creator of the show, and everyone wants to know who Don Draper is based on. And he would never do it. And I heard an interview with him where he finally admitted George Lois is mainly the guy who Don Draper is based on. And but George Lois doesn't necessarily, he's still alive, by the way. He doesn't like this at all. Here's a quote, we're going to talk about George Lois in depth here, and I got to warn you that there's an F-bomb coming in his quote, because that's the kind of guy George Lois is. But he was asked about this, and this is a quote that he just gave in a Playboy magazine interview. The more I think and write about Mad Men, the more I take the show as a personal insult. So F you, Mad Men, you phony, gray flannel suit, male chauvinist, no talent, wasp, red-shirted, white-shirted, racist, anti-Semitic Republican SOBs, unquote. I told you the real people were more interesting. So what I'd like to do in the next 30 minutes is actually talk to you about the real madmen and madwomen. They're much more interesting. And specifically, I'd like to talk to you about 4 people. Bill Bernbach, who passed away in 1982. Phyllis Robinson, who passed away in 2010. George Lois, who is still alive and kicking and a pain in everyone's rump. And Mary Wells, who's one of my favorites. She's probably the most celebrated and the most successful she made more money than anyone on Madison Avenue. And her life is probably the one that's closest to a Mad Men episode. We'll talk about her in just a bit. I want to start at the very top. Some of you who know me well know that I idolize this guy, Bill Bernbach. None of us would be here today, and you may disagree, and none of us would be doing the work that we're doing today, and there would be no Mad Men show without Bill Bernbach. In my opinion, he was the most important figure in advertising history. He was the founder and creative director of Doyle Lane Bernbach. Again, in my opinion, the greatest advertising agency that has ever been. It was founded in 1949 by him, Jim Doyle, and Max Dane, and it was founded in New York. It still exists today. It's called DDB Worldwide, but it's just a shadow of what it was when he ran it. More than anyone else, Bill Bernbach was the person responsible for advertising's creative revolution. His influence really cannot be overestimated. Before the creative revolution, and we're talking, creative revolution started really in the late 50s, mid 50s, because Doyle Lane Bernbach was started in 1949. Before that time, advertising, almost all advertising, was awful. I mean, we're talking ridiculous illustrations of happy families, stupid mascots, puerile, repetitive copy, and irritating jingles. I'll give you an example. Here's what an auto ad looked like from the period before the creative revolution, before Bill Bernbach. Now, I don't quite understand what's going on here. I don't know what the building means, and there's only a little bit of copy, and bold Pontiac. I don't know what bold Pontiac means. I don't know why I'd want a bold car, but the little copy above it says, "A bold new car for a bold new generation." I know absolutely zip about what this car does. I can see what it looks like. I don't know what kind of gas mileage. I don't know if it runs well. I don't know anything. I don't know about the interior. I don't know anything about it. So before Bill Bernbach, this is what car advertising looked like. After Bill Bernbach, this is what car advertising looked like. It also has only a few lines of, or a few words of copy, or buy a Volkswagen. I know instantly in the first 3 seconds exactly what I'm going to get with a Volkswagen. It gets great gas mileage. By the way, this is revolutionary. That's why they call it the creative revolution. I mean, look at this and compare it to this. This, by the way, was the actual art director's sketch that they used to show this to the client. And Bill Bernbach thought it was so cool that he insisted that they use it as the visual. The art director wanted to take a photo, and Bernbach said, no, this is it. This is perfect. And his biggest contribution to what we do today is the marrying of copy and art, copy and graphic. They work together. You really don't need any other copy here. You know exactly what the benefit is by a short headline and a graphic. And that's really what he brought to the process that we have today. Bill Bernbach started the creative revolution with this ad that he wrote for his new agency. And I'd like to pass it out to you because I'd love to have you keep it, because, and I'm going to read it out loud because it deserves to be read out loud. And you'll understand what I'm talking about. I keep saying this term, creative revolution, over and over again. I want to read this to you, and it deserves to be read out loud. Headline, do this or die. Is this ad some kind of trick? No, but it could have been. And at exactly that point rests a do or die decision for American business. We in advertising, together with our clients, have all the power and skill to trick people, or so we think, but we're wrong. We can't fool any of the people any of the time. There is indeed a 12-year-old mentality in this country. Every 6-year-old has one. We are a nation of smart people, and most smart people ignore most advertising because most advertising ignores smart people. Instead, we talk to each other. We debate endlessly about the medium and the message. Nonsense. In advertising, the message itself is the message. A blank page and a blank television screen are one and the same. And above all, the messages we put on those pages and on those television screens must be the truth. For if we play tricks with the truth, we die. Now, the other side of the coin. Telling the truth about a product demands a product that's worth telling the truth about. Sadly, so many products aren't. So many products don't do anything better or anything different. So many don't work quite right, or don't last, or simply don't matter. If we also play this trick, we also die. Because advertising only helps a bad product fail faster. No donkey chases the carrot forever. He catches on and quits. That's the lesson to remember. Unless we do, we die. Unless we change, the tidal wave of consumer indifference will wallop into the mountain of advertising and manufacturing drivel. That day we die. We'll die in our marketplace, on our shelves, in our gleaming packages of empty promises. Not with a bang, not with a whimper, but by our own skilled hands. Now, I don't know about you, but if I was a business owner in the period, I think I'd want this guy writing my ads. I don't think I've read better copy. Have you? I mean, talk about this is the first shot in the creative revolution. No other agency wrote ads like this for themselves. This is still as vibrant and lively as it is today. I mean, it still packs the same wallop. So when he started his agency, this is what came out. Bernbach assembled a group of copywriters and art directors who hated crappy advertising as much as he did. He invented the copywriter, art director, creative team. That's the basis of everything we do today. Every agency has the copywriter and art director work together. That's not the way it was. Before DDB, before Bill Bernbach, the AE would throw the job jacket on the desk of the copywriter, who would kind of drowsily write it and then literally put it under the door of the art director. There was no collaboration at all, and the art director was supposed to make eye candy, make it pretty. That's why you had bold Pontiac. I mean, that's why there were really no great ideas. But Bill Bernbach put a stop to that. In his agency, he put the art director in the office of the copywriter and had them come up with the concept together. That's why all their work, that's why the visuals and the copy work so fabulous for all their stuff, because it was the art director and the copywriter together responsible for the idea. As I said, when this happened, the headline and the graphic began to work together for the first time, and it resulted in incredible work. Now, I'm going to show you some of this work in a minute. Before I do, I want to talk to you a little bit about Bill Bernbach himself. As you can see, he was no Don Draper. He doesn't look like Don Draper. Certainly not a matinee idol. He kind of looks like a schlubby little accountant. He was a happily married man with two well-adjusted sons who both went into advertising and had good careers in advertising. He lived in a little bungalow in Brooklyn, so he didn't have an expensive car. He didn't have a car at all. He took the subway back and forth to work. He didn't live in a glamorous Manhattan apartment. He lived in a little bungalow with his wife and two kids in Brooklyn. He took the subway to work every day. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't sleep with clients, and he never worked past 5 o'clock or on weekends. He was incredibly frugal, as was the rest of his agency, and they never entertained clients, ever. He was asked about it once, and he said, I'd rather keep the money for myself. The only hobbies he had were reading and listening to music. That was it. He didn't write fiction, he He didn't write articles. He was an ad man. Now you're probably saying, well, what made him more interesting than Don Draper? That's the whole point of your presentation. He sounds pretty boring to me. What made him more interesting were two things. Number one, his ego, and number two, the work that he did. Bill Bernbach had an ego so big that he makes Don Draper look like a Benedictine monk. I want to tell you 4 stories that are all true. I've done a lot of research and they're all true. One day, he and one of his account executives were walking back to the agency through downtown Manhattan. It was a nice spring day, and the AE said, "Boy, Bill, isn't this great weather?" To which Bernbach responded, "Thank you." Whenever one of his creatives would leave to go work for another agency, which didn't happen very often because everybody wanted to work for Doyle, Dane, Bernbach, especially Bill Bernbach, he would tell his copy chief, Phyllis Robinson, I don't know what these people are doing. I mean, they're going to be helpless without my guiding hand. True. David Ogilvy, you probably know that name pretty well. I don't consider him one of the madmen, to be honest with you. I think he's kind of too curmudgeon-y for that. But he tells the story of when Bill Bernbach volunteered Doyle Dane Bernbach to come up with a pro bono TV ad for the United Negro College Fund, which David Ogilvy was the chairperson of at that time. Bernbach came in and presented a storyboard that was a piece of art. It was brilliant. It was a fabulous branding spot before branding was even in vogue, but it was not written to solicit cash contributions, which is what they wanted. So Ogilvy said, Bill, this is incredible, but we're not going to get any contributions from it. To which Bernbach responded, "Oh, David, you don't need to worry. Any agency in New York would be glad to do this job for you." The spot was produced as it was presented. Bernbach one day was interviewing a young creative, and he asked him, "Are you a good copywriter?" To which the young man said, "Well, I think I'm pretty good." To which Bernbach responded, "Well, the instant you start working for me, you'll be incredibly better." Actually, it's instantly better. This is what he said. So the man was not a saint, and he had a fully sufficient ego. But it's hard to be humble when you do the kind of work that he did. Bill Bernbach was an incredible teacher, and he was the creative director's creative director. He knew exactly how to get the best work from his people. He would walk into the creative team's office and he'd look at the thumbnails they were doing, and he would be able, oftentimes he knew what the headline should be right away, but he learned very early in his career as a creative director, not to spurt that out. Because he learned that the most important thing for creatives is it's their property and their work. And when he would come in and say, "Why don't you try this headline?" it would piss him off. So he didn't do that. And he learned very quickly that what he needed to do was ask questions to lead them to a better solution. And they always did, because he hired really great people. He didn't scream at his people. He didn't threaten his people. He didn't compete with his people. And that's kind of the things, that's another beef of mine with Mad Men. I mean, if you've seen it, he treats his creative staff like peasants. Don Draper is so mean. He's such a creep to him. Bill Bernbach didn't do that. And the most important thing he didn't do is compete with them. As a creative director, you walk a very fine line because you want to keep your hand in the game by creating. And some creative directors will throw their own ideas in. And sometimes, well, most of the time, those ideas make it to the final round. Guess why? Well, Bill Bernbach never did that. He learned that very quick. So let's look at some of his work. And I think we all know, I don't know, but most of us know the classic campaigns of Doyle Dane Bernbach. Volkswagen, Polaroid, Jamaica, all these kind of things. But I think the most vivid example of Bill Bernbach's work is Avis Rent-A-Car. Some of you probably know the campaign very well, but it's worth going over again. In 1962, Avis Rent-A-Car, still in business today, came to Doyle Dane Bernbach, and they were in huge trouble. They were the number 2 rent-a-car company after Hertz, which was the undisputed king, but they were falling fast. They had terrible advertising. They had the whole company was just in tatters, and so they came to Bill Bernbach and said, "You got to help us. I mean, if you can use creative to change our future, then do it. You got carte blanche." Here's what Hertz was running, the number 1 competitor or not the competitor, but the number one company. And a dipshittier ad I don't think I've ever seen. Here and now, Hertz has the new 1959 Chevrolet, and it's insulting to women. They have this, it's like a what's the show on with the Price is Right kind of thing. Apparently, the Hertz staff wore these little uniforms. What amazes me is these little woodcuts in the background. Business, travel, vacation, shopping, conventions. This was the advertising that was making them the number one rent-a-car company. Avis was so desperate that they told Bill Bernbach, we will run anything you suggest and we won't change a word. They actually had a contract. Bill Bernbach made him sign off on it. And they said that we'll do anything you recommend. Here's what he recommended. Avis needs you. You don't need Avis. Avis never forgets this. Now compare this to this. Now I want to read you this copy. We're still a little hungry. We're only number 2 in rent-a-cars. Customers aren't a dime a dozen to us. Sometimes when business is too good, they get the short end and aren't treated like customers anymore. Wouldn't you like the novel experience of walking up to a counter and not feeling like you're bothering somebody? Try it. Come to the Avis counter and rent a new lively Super Torque Ford. I love that. Avis is only number 2 in rent-a-cars, so we have to try harder to make our customers feel like customers. Our counters all have 2 sides, and we know which side our bread is buttered on. Here's the second ad in the campaign. We're only number 2. When you're only number 2, you try harder or else. Little fish have to keep moving all the time. The big ones never stop picking on them. And Avis knows all about the problems of little fish. We're only number 2 in rent-a-cars. We'd be swallowed up if we didn't try harder. There's no rest for us. We're always emptying ashtrays, making sure gas tanks are full before we rent our cars, seeing that batteries are full of life, checking our windshield wipers. And the cars we rent out can't be anything less than lively new Super Torque Fords. I don't know, it makes me smile. Super Torque Fords. And since we're not the big fish, you won't feel like a sardine when you come to our counter. We're not jammed with customers. I just don't know how copy gets any better than that. And the great part of this campaign is, after a year and a half with Doyle and Bernbach, their market share went up 28%. 28%. And they were firmly ensconced at number 2, which was a big deal because they were probably, by the time they had gone to Doyle and Bernbach, they had probably fallen to 4. So the ingenious part of this is not only the copy and not only the great benefits that it gets through, it's the fact that they instantly went above 3 and 4 back up to 2 just by saying we're number 2. That's great advertising. I could be here all day showing you other stuff that Doyle Dane did, but there are just 2 that I wanted to show you from the Volkswagen campaign. This is an ad that ran the day after the astronauts got back from the first moon landing, and it's a little toy of the moon lander, and the headline is, it's ugly, but it gets you there. Everyone knew that VWs were ugly. And remember what he said in this ad? The truth is what's going to sell your product. They never had any problem telling the truth. Here's my favorite billboard of all time. Relieves gas pains. And this is what outdoor, I gave this presentation the other day out on 72nd Street, so I was going down the interstate. I can't tell you how many billboards had 10 to 20 words on them, along with numerous pictures and so on. The lady from Lamar was at the presentation. She says, it's not our fault. But this is what a billboard's supposed to be. Not the phone number, not the address, just a supplementary message. Goes perfectly with that ad with the thing with the guy with the thing at his head. So anyway, that's Doyle Dane Bernbach. Who I'd like to talk to you about second is Phyllis Robinson. Now, this is probably not a name you know very well. And it's mostly because Phyllis Robinson was more concerned with doing great work than self-promotion, which was kind of a Mary Wells thing. And Phyllis Robinson disproves this whole casting couch thing that comes across in Mad Men. And that's kind of my third beef with Mad Men. Why do all the female characters on the show have to go through such grief to get ahead? It really didn't happen that way. I mean, it's nice, juicy TV, but Phyllis Robinson shows that it didn't happen that way. That's one of the things I hate about Mad Men. I mean, Peggy Olson had to start as a secretary and literally beg Don Draper to write little bits of copy. And the Joan Harris character, if you remember, had to actually sleep with a client to become a partner in the firm. It didn't happen that way. And really, I think it's insulting to women because women didn't have to go through this. Phyllis Robinson started at the top and stayed at the top. She started her career at Gray Advertising as a copywriter. She didn't start as a secretary. She didn't have to sleep with anybody. She was brilliant, she was talented, and she was one of their top copywriters. Bill Bernbach saw the work that she did and hired her to be his first copy chief, which is the position she retained the entire 20 years she was at Dildane Bernbach. She was a happily married woman to one man her entire life. She had a very well-adjusted daughter who was not born out of wedlock. And she was a mentor to a generation of other female copywriters and male copywriters. Specifically Mary Wells and Paula Green owe a lot of their success to her. She was a lot more interesting again than Don Draper because of the work that she did. And her biggest success was ads she created for a department store in New York called Orbox. And I guess the best way today to understand it is they were kind of the Gordmans of New York. And they competed against Macy's and Bloomingdale's, which had advertising budgets 20 to 50% above Orbox. Orbox was kind of here's where you come to get your kind of, discount kind of clothing kind of a thing. And she partnered with Bob Gage, who I wish I could talk about today, but we don't have the time. They were a classic partnership, copywriter, art director partnership. And as I said, they did these ads for Orbox, and they competed directly against the big boys, Macy's and Bloomingdale's. Here's a Macy's ad from this time. It's for their men's shop. Macy's men's store knows it's Yale. And I have to read this because it's so bad. We should know Yale. It's men, it's customs, it's traditions of dress. We've been selling on campus opposite Sterling for quite a few years now, and it goes on and gets even worse. And not only do I hate the headline for whatever that's called, but this dippy little illustration of the guy smoking. Now, this is what Macy's was running, which ran the markets. This is what was in the New York Times. They probably had 10 to 20 ads running at one time. Orbox could only afford one. Here's Orbox ad for their men's shop. Shop at Orbox Men's Shop. Now, when you look at you say to yourself, well, this is just a little visual game. Exactly. You didn't see this kind of thing in the New York Times. You saw this, not this. And that's all. Robinson was so brilliant, she knew that's all she had to do was break through the boredom barrier. Okay? She was most famous for this ad. I found out about Joan. It's a cat with a with a cigarette holder and one of those hats. And the copy is really hard to read. This is an ad that's really hard to find. But the copy talks about, it's this cat talking about this woman named Joan who dresses really well, and everyone thought she was rich and she got her stuff from Bloomingdale's, but no, she shops at Orbox. So it's this kind of, gossipy kind of a thing. And you're saying, well, these are really fun, but did they really work? You better believe they work, and let me tell you why. Because in 1958, when Volkswagen came to New York to start selling the Beetle, marketing it to America, they didn't do an agency search. They came to New York and they started asking people, who does the Orbox stuff? That's who we want. There was no RFP or nothing. They found out that Phyllis Robinson and Bob Gage did these, and they went to Dildane Bernbach, and they were with Dildane Bernbach the entire time. Okay? So let's go on to, to George Lois. He's probably I know some of you younger guys don't know this, but he's probably the most well-known of the genuine madmen because he's got such an outrageous personality. He's still alive today. And many of the antics that I'm going to tell you about, I'm sure inspired Mad Men episodes. Lois was born in the Bronx, and he was the only Greek kid in an all-Irish neighborhood. He got beat up, and he beat up people daily. His nose was broken 3 times before he was 16 years old. And it didn't help that he carried around a portfolio. He liked to draw. And that didn't help when you're the only Greek kid in a tough Irish neighborhood. He actually was a fantastic athlete. He got a full ride scholarship to Syracuse in basketball, but he turned it down because he wanted to go to the Pratt Institute and become a designer, which is exactly what he did. His first big break was as an art director for Dole & Bernbach. He worked for Bill Bernbach, who saw immediately how brilliant he was. But he was also mouthy, arrogant, profane, and extremely talented. Bill Bernbach said, "The only problem with you, George, is that your mind is in the gutter." Every other word was F, you know. And he got into big trouble his first day at Dole & Bernbach. I got to tell you the story; it's great. The day that he started, the production manager sent out these really, I wanted to say emails, but no, there were no emails. This really snotty memo to everybody saying, "You art directors," to the art directors, "I know you're keeping the props that you're using, the fur coats for Orbach's and I know you. So I want, at the end of every day, I want every prop that was in a photo shoot on my desk." Well, Lois's first ad was for a fish market, and he uses dead fish. And he waited until the guy left, until 10 o'clock, and he waited until the fish got good and smelly. He went into the guy's desk, put it on the desk with a little note pinned to the gill that said, "Here's your prop, asshole, George Lois." That was his first day. He, by the way, little piece of trivia here, he was the first art director that I know of in advertising history who actually dealt directly with a client. Before these days, art directors were kept in their offices. You know, they were the crazy ones. And the creative director almost always presented everything. Sometimes the copywriter could do it. But he designed a poster for a little Jewish matzah company in Long Island. And the AE showed it to the little 92-year-old owner of this little Jewish company. And the guy didn't like it. And the AE comes back to the office and tells Lois this, and Lois says, "What the hell do you mean he didn't like it?" "Well, George, they killed it." He said, "They didn't kill anything." He got in his car, got in his car before anybody could stop him, drove to Long Island, went to this company, and the guy's office was on the 5th floor, broke into the guy's office while he was doing something else, and demanded that this little 92-year-old guy approve this poster. To which the little guy said, "No, I'm not. I don't like it." Lois went to the window, opened the window. You know, you didn't have the glass boxes. You know, you had windows. Got out onto the ledge and threatened to jump unless this guy approved the ad. And all the time he was yelling at the top of his lungs, "You make matzah, I make ads." Guess what happened? It got approved and it ran. So only a year after he started, he was only at Dole a year, he started a company called Papert, Koenig & Lois, another ad agency. This is Fred Papert here, the AE. This is Julian Koenig, who wrote all the VW stuff, a lot of the VW stuff, and Lois on the end there. And it was called PKL, everyone called it PKL, but it was Papert, Koenig & Lois. He started it in 1960. And this agency was as wild and insane as he was. People got into fist fights in the halls. Clients got yelled at regularly. Lois's favorite thing that he yelled at clients was, "I don't care what you think you like. I care about raising your market share." Most people knew what they were getting into when they dealt with him. But, and there were frequent fights with T-squares. I mean, it was called, the nickname of the place was Stillman's East. And I don't know if you're familiar with Stillman's West, which is a boxing club in New York. This place is called Stillman's East. In 1966, a copywriter for the agency sued the agency because he did not want to work in an atmosphere of physical violence anymore. But out of this came brilliant work, really brilliant work. Some of it that I think surpasses Dole & Bernbach. This is their most famous campaign. It's for Wolf Schmidt's vodka. And back then, nobody had even heard of it. And the big one was Smirnoff, and I don't drink vodka. Is Smirnoff the big one now, or is it Absolute? I don't know, whoever. Anyway, This was a series of ads that ran in magazines across the United States. I'll read you this copy. In every one of them, this vodka bottle tries to seduce a piece of fruit or a vegetable. There's one with an onion. There's one with a clove of garlic. And the bottle says, "You're some tomato. We can make beautiful Bloody Marys together. I'm different from the other fellas." To which the tomato responds, "I like you, Goldschmidt. You've got taste." The second one, there's a one with an orange, just trying to make it with an orange kind of a thing. And, you know, for the drinks you make with vodka, all the different kind of fruits and vegetables. They also did work for Allerest. And I can't read you the copy here, but I love the headline. "You don't have a cold." "I don't have a cold." "You have an allergy." "I have an allergy." Come on. They're just using copy, and these guys were at a whole different level. Now, they've got a lot of fabulous work that they did, but most of you who know me know that my favorite ad of all time is this one. It's for a little company out of Massachusetts that made furniture. It's called Harvey Prober Furniture, and they made this kind of mid-century modern. Well, it's mid-century modern now, but very modern kind of furniture. And if you see here, I'll read you the copy because this copy just is murder. If you see here, this chair has got a little matchbook cover under it, obviously, and it's sitting on this floor. And the headline is, "If your Harvey Prober chair wobbles, straighten your floor." You don't need to read anymore, but listen to this. It just makes me want to bawl. "Every piece of furniture that Harvey Prober makes at Fall River, Massachusetts is placed on a test platform to make sure it's on the level. If you get it, it is. Mr. Prober loses a lot of furniture this way. Mr. Prober's furniture has an almost luminous satin finish. It's produced by a unique machine that has 5 fingers and is called the human hand. This luminous finish takes a long time to achieve, but it lasts a long time. This lovely chair above could be made with 14 less dowels, 2 yards less webbing, thinner woods, and so forth. You probably wouldn't know the difference, but Harvey Prober would. And of course, in a few years, you would know too." I just don't have words for how good that is. And I'm ready to buy. You know, that was the power of these people. They didn't rely on gimmicks. Ever. So let's talk about, he's still around. George Lois is still around. He's about 85 right now. He still does work, and he's still mouthy, and he's still a pain in everybody's butt. He's actually got a website called georgelois.com where you can see all his classic work, and he's done a lot of fabulous work. And lots of his quotes. If you don't like the F-bomb, don't go there because it's every other word, but it's a fun website to look at. Finally, this is kind of my favorite person. I love Bill Bernbach, but I really love Mary Wells. She's also still alive. She's about 86 years old. And she was the most successful advertising practitioner of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. The most successful, both professionally, financially, and creatively. And she's probably, as I said, the person who comes closest, whose life comes closest to be an episode of Mad Men. She came to New York at 18 years old, and she wanted to be an actress, but she fell in love with an art director, and who worked on the Macy's account, and I can't remember the agency. And she decided that she was going to try her hand at acting border, and so she was going to try her hand at copywriting. Well, she found right away that she had a natural talent for it, and she was hired by Phyllis Robinson about a year after she started. She was at Doyle & Bernbach 7 years, and during the time she spent there, she found out she was not only a great copywriter, but she was a brilliant presenter and had a natural business sense. She's probably the best business person of everybody that I'm talking to you about. As you can see, she didn't look like Phyllis Robinson. She was quite attractive. And because she was so pretty and stylish, she got the nickname Bunny Wells at Doyle & Bernbach. And she didn't mind that because she was into self-promotion, and that didn't hurt her at all. And she got lots of attention from clients and co-workers alike. During these years, she divorced her first husband and then remarried him again, and then divorced him again. She worked with George Lois for a year, and here's what George Lois said about her. Bunny moved like a swan among brass and clients. You could tell Mary Wells would never end up with wrinkles in a writer's tower. and she did not. In fact, in 1963, Jack Tinker and Partners hired her away. Everybody wanted her because she was such a great copywriter. Youngest person ever to be inducted into the Copywriters Hall of Fame. Hired her away from Dole Bernbach to write for Alka-Seltzer and Braniff Airlines at a unheard of salary. You ready for this time? $60,000 a year, which was unheard of. This is 1963, you guys. And so she started writing for Alka-Seltzer and Braniff, but this was only the beginning of her success. As I said, she divorced her first husband a second time in 1965, and she married one of her clients, the president of Braniff Airlines, Harding Lawrence. A few months after that, she quit Jack Tinker and Partners and started her own ad agency, Wells, Rich and Green. And guess what her first account was? Braniff Airlines, taking the $6 million Braniff Airlines account with her. Wells, Rich and Green was one of the biggest success stories of the era. Just a year after they opened, they were able to get the Alka-Seltzer account away from Dole Bernbach. And some of you younger friends here don't know this, but Dole Bernbach did probably one of the most famous TV commercials of all time during this. Mamma mia, that's a spicy meatball. If you've never seen the spot, look it up on YouTube. It's hysterical. It's one of my favorites of all time. But when they did that, she still got the account away from Dole Bernbach. That's how good she was. And by 1969, she was head of Wells, Rich and Green, and she was making $250,000 a year, which ain't chicken feed today. She was the person making the most money on Madison Avenue, way more than Ogilvy, way more than Bernbach, way more than Rosser Reeves. She owned the town. She and her husband, speaking of owned 5 homes, one in Manhattan, one in Dallas, one in Arizona, one in Acapulco, and one on the French Riviera. As I said, Wells, Rich and Green was an agency that was very well run, and she was a brilliant businesswoman, and she ran Wells, Rich and Green lean and mean. She did not believe in lots of staffing. She didn't like to pay the overhead. Although she paid her creative people well, she didn't like a lot of them because that meant that she wasn't making profits, and profit was her main objective. She really pushed her staff very, very hard, and they were very overworked. You know, there was one copywriter, art director team to like 6 large clients. I mean, these people worked hard. But they came up with really innovative creative. As a matter of fact, Mary Wells was the first advertising person to ever sell things to clients that were over and above a radio spot, a TV spot, that kind of thing. She actually went beyond that. Here's probably their biggest success, Braniff Airlines. Mary Wells hired fashion designer Emilio Pucci to design new uniforms for all the Braniff stewardesses, which they wore on long flights. And this is the famous ad from the period when they introducing the airstrip. And when you got onto the planes, and back in these days, you know, you didn't walk comfortably down a thing and get on. You know, you had to walk up one of those, you know, they wheel one of those staircases, and you were out in the middle of whatever. So the stewardesses would greet people in this outfit, and then during long flights, they gradually take off one thing at a time until they ended up basically in pajamas. Not only did she do this, she also hired very famous artists to actually paint the Braniff planes, which had never been done before. It had been done, but in terms of, you know, your red stripe down the side with TWA on the side. I don't know if any of you ever heard of Alexander Calder. He invented the Mobile, one of those things, that yellow thing hanging in the... he invented that, and she gave him carte blanche to do a plane, and this was his design for the plane. And he even signed it up near the door, Calder. I think she hired Jackson Pollock to do one, you know, all these famous artists. So in a real sense, she was the person who invented environmental advertising. No other agency had done this before, even thought about, hey, maybe we should make suggestions about what the stewardesses wear, or that kind of thing. She was the one that invented it. This is why she was so successful. She sold her agency for a fortune in 1990 to Interrepublic, and today at 86, she's probably the most honored woman if not person, in advertising history, and she deserves it. Wells, Rich and Green, I think it was the second agency ever to go public, and she made a fortune doing that. And she has a book out that I own, if you like to borrow it, called A Big Life in Advertising. She's just a great writer, and she even writes great. Do you have that book, Jolene? Yeah. I mean, she just writes sparkling prose. I mean, that's why she was so successful. So these are the Mad Men and Mad Women. I hope you agree they're much more interesting than Don Draper and Roger Sterling and the rest of them. And I really hope that most of all, their work inspires you as much as it does me. I read lots of interviews with the bigwigs today, the Boguskis and the Jeff Goodbys and the creative directors that are Vogue and all, the Lee Clowes, everybody. And almost to a person, they all say, when people ask them, what happens when you get burned out as a copywriter, as a creative person? They all say, I go back to the basics. I look at a Doyle Dannenberg and Bach ad. That's how I get inspired again. You go back to the basics, the Bible kind of thing. So that's my presentation. Anybody have any questions or comments or anything you'd like to know about that I didn't cover? There are lots of other people during this time that were legitimately, involved in the creative revolution. Jerry Della Femina, we just didn't have the time. But these are kind of the big four of the period. So any questions or comments or anything? Anybody?
Never met Bill.
Bill Birnbach? No, he died in 1982 of leukemia. I was never able to. Yeah. So I wish I would have met him. He was very soft-spoken, although he had that huge ego. He was a very soft-spoken guy. But he had a fully adequate self-image.
Do you need an agent?
What's that?
Do you need an agent?
Do I? For him?
You should go
Oh.
around and present this to other ad clubs.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, really
Appreciate it.
valuable.
So, anyway, I've got copies of the show if you want to read the copy up close. But great, thanks guys.
Well, thank you.
You bet.
Mark?